And we're recording.
Excellent. Well, good morning, and we're calling to order the Municipal Accountability Review Board meeting for Thursday, March 11th from 10 to 12 noon. First of all, I just want to welcome you today. Thank you to our board members, recognizing my distinguished co-chair, Ms. Christine Shaw. Glad to see all of your faces as we've operated in a remote environment for about a year, and we are now converting our MARB meetings to video. So very pleased that we're able to do that. Just a couple of introductory remarks. I think we all know that yesterday and today marks about a year since we've been in the COVID, climbing out of this COVID pandemic. And Connecticut is doing extremely well, as you can see, with our very low positivity rates. We're being nationally recognized for the timeliness in which we're rolling out our vaccine. I just want to commend this team that despite some of those challenges, we've continued the good work that we're statutorily charged to do under the MARB. And secondly, this is a really great moment for municipalities with resources that are forthcoming from the federal government. You've also seen resources that were reflected in the governor's proposed budget, and at a later point on the agenda, I'll be happy to provide an update. You're also seeing changes in the state's policy and legislation concerning pilots and how to best provide more equitable resources to make up for lost property tax revenues. There's a little nuance to that bill, and I look forward to providing updates. But so much of the work that we do is focused on municipalities, our municipalities' long-term sustainability. And we have an incredible opportunity with the bill that passed the legislature here in Connecticut, and the investments that the federal government are providing that allow us to strengthen our cities and prepare for Connecticut's comeback. So those are the opening remarks I wanted to share with you today. Ms. Shaw, is there anything that you'd care to share in terms of opening remarks for our committee?
Not at this time, Madam Secretary, but thank you.
Excellent. All right, so first on the agenda will be the public comment period. If you've joined today and you would like to offer comments, please do limit them to 2 minutes. Please identify yourself, your address, and your city of residency.
And it's *6 to unmute.
Okay, seeing none, we'll move on to the approval of the minutes for the February 11th, 2021 regular meeting. Is there a motion for the approval of the minutes?
Mark, so moved.
I second that motion.
Great, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Bob, are you trying to provide discussion on the minutes, sir?
No, I was just getting ready to say yes.
Very good. All right, seeing no discussion, Julian, over to you.
Mr. White.
Yes.
Mr. Waxenberg.
Yes.
Mr. Biller.
Yes.
Mr. Hamilton.
Sorry, yes.
Yes.
Ms. Shaw. You're muted, Christine.
Yes.
Thank you. And Secretary McCaw.
Abstain.
Are there any other members of the MARB who have joined the meeting that I didn't mention? Okay, that's everybody.
Great, okay, our minutes have been approved. Next up, starting with the City of West Haven, is the subcommittee update. A written update was provided in your agenda materials today. I'm going to ask Kim Kennison or Julian to provide us with an overview for the most recent subcommittee.
I'm going to pass to have Julian please give us the update, since this is his great works. Julian, did you hear me?
Sorry, I started and was on mute. The subcommittee met on February 23rd. The largest portion of the meeting was taken up reviewing the Board of Education's recommended budget for FY22. There are some highlights included in the written update, but overall, the Board of Ed is proposing a 1.8% increase over the current year budget, requiring roughly the same amount from the general fund contribution. A couple of moving parts potentially still in how much of Alliance funding is used to offset increases in the Board of Ed budget, but I think that will be sorted out over the next few weeks as we await the overall city proposed budget, which will be submitted by the March 18th, which is next week, and will be a topic on the March subcommittee agenda. And then we also received an update on the ADP project, which at this point, I believe is live, although it may be another week or so. And we received an update on the revaluation. Overall, a 9.5% higher final grand list than what was originally projected in the 5-year plan for the citywide grand list. And we're expecting additional detail on the grand list regarding any potential shift in the tax burden across different property classes, and also a breakdown to identify how much of the growth in the grand list is attributable to actual growth, construction, development, redevelopment versus the market changes reflected in the reval. And our next subcommittee meeting is scheduled for, there's a typo in the write-up, it's scheduled for March 23rd.
Julian, any questions or discussion on the subcommittee update? Congratulations, Mayor, on seeing grand list growth that exceeded your original assumptions. Okay, seeing no other questions, we will move on to the review and discussion of the monthly financial report. Mayor, over to you or to your CFO, Frank.
Good morning, all. Can you hear me?
Yes, we can. Good morning, Frank.
Great, good morning. It's great to see everybody again. So you should have the financial report in front of you for 7 months. Things are looking well so far for the city. One thing I did note is that tax revenues appear to be behind prior year when you're looking at the 6-month results, that is, or the 7-month results rather. That is only because of the winter storm that happened at the end of January. City Hall was closed on the 31st. So monies that would have hit the lockbox on the 31st did not hit until February 1st. You know, kind of normalizing for that, it was roughly $1.5 million that hit the following day. So normalizing for that, the collection rate is back in line with what we've seen in prior years. So again, not too much concern there. We are seeing from the revenue side, we are seeing some pickup on some of the permits as the building department starts pushing through its backlog. So still projecting a reduction compared to the budget, but not as bad as I thought it was going to be. So we continue to monitor that on an ongoing basis. You know, the city did receive COVID funds, which are in our numbers. We are in the process of going through the expenses to make a reclass out of the individual departments into the account that was created to capture all the COVID expenses. So that for example, the overtime in the police department, any overtime related to officers that were out with COVID and had to be backfilled. That will be moved out of the police department operating budget into the COVID line. That will help not only with projections as I go forward in the year using past year timing, but also it will make year-over-year comparison much easier next year once we start hopefully getting activities that are not being clouded by COVID expenses. So that effort is going on. Mike DeMassa has been a huge help trying to pull all that information for us. And hopefully I expect to get an entry put together for either the February or the February report, at the latest, the March report. So projecting for the general fund, we are projecting at this point a small surplus. Again, that number has a lot of money that I've layered in for unknown expenses related to COVID that are coming, have not been submitted yet. I have not seen yet. It could be, could hit before the end of the year. So that number will be adjusted as we move forward throughout the rest of the year, and numbers are, starting to solidify on that front. For the sewer department, as well as Allentown, we're seeing the same anomaly in the taxes as we did for the general fund. Obviously, any monies that came in on February 1st should have been reported, normally have been reported in January, so you're seeing a reduction year over year in the tax revenues there. But again, the monies that did come in, I expect that to be back to normal. We are seeing monies from, in this report, we did not see any of the monies from the town of Orange related to their share of the sewer. But we did get a check from them that should show up in the February report. So that shortfall should take care of itself. We are projecting on the sewer side, I'm projecting a surplus in that account. At this point, we are maintaining the entire contingency within the sewer budget to cover any potential capital or shortfalls there. As we get closer to the end of the year, I'll be able to solidify that with the WPCA leader and the sewer commission. Allentown, we are projecting a slight deficit. Again, some of that is COVID, so I'm trying to dig into that. The overtime in Allentown was much higher than normal. Again, for the same reason as the police department in both of those organizations. Obviously, if somebody is out under quarantine, we must hire back and pay the overtime to backfill that position, so we have officers and firefighters on duty 24/7. Not necessarily the case in City Hall. If a member of Public Works is out on quarantine, we don't necessarily hire anyone back to backfill that position. So,
Frank, I have a question on that. You had mentioned with respect to the police that you're going to be able to move that unexpected overtime off to your COVID relief grant funding. Can you do the same with respect to the fire, or are the fire districts getting their own allocation of COVID relief funding?
I am waiting. That's a question that I have into Allentown to see if they received anything. I don't see any revenues for them.
They did not. The towns were allowed to reallocate a portion of their funds if they saw fit to the fire districts. So there is no separate CRF allocation for the fire districts. But I wanted to ask, since we're on that topic, just drill in a little bit further. I see in the revenues that we're reflecting in the projected 166.2 million of projected revenues for fiscal 21, the $4 million of muni restructuring funds. Do you also have reflected in this report the amount of funds you received from the municipal CRF? Do you have the revenues reflected on page 2 of your package, Frank?
I do. The line, unfortunately, the line on the report is directly above the restructuring funds. It looks like it did not print out It was,
Okay.
it was $1 million and change.
Okay, so you have that reflected in here, okay.
That is part of the 166, yes, ma'am.
Okay, excellent. You are aware that you have significant flexibility under the Treasury guidance with respect to the public safety language, that employees that are working in public safety or public health are deemed to be substantially dedicated to responding to the COVID pandemic. So what I heard you say thus far is you've been carving out the overtime that is associated with enforcement. You can go much broader than that. I mean, if you find yourself in the position that you can't utilize all the CRF dollars, you can use it straight for police salaries. So no dollars should be returned based on your line item for public safety or for public health. So I want to clarify that for you.
That's great to know, thank you.
Okay. And then with respect to the projection, it looks like you're lapsing some funds in regular wages, but I see you have an uptick in overtime. Some of that is probably the enforcement. I wanted to understand what was occurring under benefits and fixed charges, a budget of 3.375 million. I see you're projecting about 4.2 million. It's about a $900,000 shortfall.
So, yeah, most of that is coming, within that line item is also the Social Security, the city match for the Social Security, as well as the 401k contribution match.
Mm-hmm.
So as the overtime and some of the extra wages have been flowing through there, obviously that's going to drive up both the FICA, and for those that are contributing into the 401k, that would have some impact on that as well. That is the primary driver there. The healthcare costs we have not reduced from the budget. I am expecting to reduce that projection for the next financial report based on what we've been seeing from results coming in for the retirees, which should be the only self-funded healthcare that the city has right now.
Okay, that was going to be my next question on what you're seeing for healthcare, because a lot of organizations are seeing that there's less foot traffic, if you will, fewer elective procedures, et cetera. So you're seeing that, and you'll be adjusting your projections for fiscal 21 accordingly.
That is correct.
Great. Anything that you want to note with respect to operation of plant?
Within the sewer department?
This is on page 6. It looks like we're running about $500,000 short there.
Board of Ed.
That's Board of Ed.
Oh, that's Board of Education.
That's City of West Haven.
Yep, Board of Ed.
Board of Ed, yeah.
Superintendent, Matt and the superintendent are on the.
I know Matt has the answer. Go
Yeah.
ahead.
So now, when I'm reviewing the document that was provided to the MARB, it looks like the document that I sent to the city from Frank, the columns got transposed. The FY21 projected is the actual adopted budget amounts. So it does look like we're actually running that number under. The budget and the projected numbers were transposed in the columns.
Okay, so there's some follow-up there. All right, very good.
Yeah, it's just so the majority of our operational plan, why we're running so well is a lot of those expenses, such as HVAC repair and whatnot, were shifted over to the COVID relief funds that we had. I was able to make the reclass for this this month's financials. Last month it created some confusion because the funds weren't operational yet, but we're seeing that underrun because of those expenses shifted over to the COVID relief funds.
Very good. And do you expect to utilize your full tranche of ESSER 1 funds in 2021?
Yes.
Okay.
Yes, we do.
Good. Any other questions from the board?
Yes, I have a question, Secretary McCaw, going back to the revenue side of the report. Curious if you can explain the drop off in investment income. It looks like it's coming in at roughly 10% of what it was this time last year, or for January of 2020. And
Yeah,
if you could
that's
just,
that's reflective of, I think, what everybody is seeing in their own finances as well. The interest being paid on investments is nowhere near what it used to be.
Frank, it's the interest rate? Interest
sorry?
rates that are an all-time low.
That's correct.
right, so it depends on what you're investing in. So could you just cover briefly what that investment income is derived from? I imagine these are short-term vehicles.
I can dig into it for detail for you, but I believe most of that is coming from the STIF account.
I see. Okay, that makes sense.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And Madam Secretary, just one note on page 8, on the projection, you will see the $1.1 million of COVID relief funds in the third column from the right.
Thank you, Frank. Looks good. Any other questions regarding West Haven's financial report today?
Yeah, I have one question, Madam.
Yes, ma'am. Go right ahead.
Board of Ed, I noticed that your budget is still showing a flat line projection at this moment. I'm just wondering if your trend is really reflecting, if I look at your actuals for 7 months right now, even if I doubled that number, it looks like you would have a savings. So I'm just wondering, I know you might want to be conservative at this time, but are you still showing that you're going to spend all of this? Because I don't, unless you have a good explanation.
Right. I mean, there's no question that when you look at our financial, we are running much better than we were at this point last year. Yes, I'm being conservative, and also it is a goal of the district to get back to 5 days in person, full school days. And so I'm a little hesitant to come off budget until that plan is fully in effect and we know if there's any additional supplies or HVAC cleanings that need to be done, because I rather not present something under budget and then the next month come back and have it completely changed. So that's why I'm keeping it on budget until that plays itself out, and then after that I will definitely revisit the projection.
Thank you.
That's fair. We want to see districts expending funds to get our kids back into school. So, I mean, even beyond HVAC and safe cleaning of schools, you might need additional social, emotional supports, social workers, teachers, and the governor is encouraging that.
We're working on that plan right now, Madam Secretary.
Excellent. Great to hear. Ms. Kennison, anything further that you have on your end?
No, thank you.
Okay. Other questions on the financial report? Okay, excellent. Seeing none, we're going to move on to review, discussion, and possible action regarding the West Haven Federation of Teachers labor contract. This is a successor contract to the current agreement, which does expire August 31st, 2021, covering the period, a 3-year period of 9/1/24 to August 9/1/21 to August 31/24. Just a reminder, the statute gives MARB the opportunity to approve or reject or take no action, which is essentially allowing approval. The window of opportunity for us to do so is through March 12th, 2021, which is the day after our meeting. You have in your meeting materials a cover memo, the settlement agreement, the analyses of the contract, and a red line version of the contract. Most of the provisions deal with wages and health insurance. The wage provisions provide for step increases. In the first 2 years of the contract, wage increases of just 1% for members at the top step in those years. The final year has a 2% wage increase to members at all steps. No step advancement is provided. The health insurance codifies the Board of Ed's option to transition members to the partnership plan, consistent with the work that we've been partnering with the City of West Haven on. The plan would be to transition the members effective July 1, 2021. Members are currently covered by a high deductible plan. The premium will remain at 20% for the health insurance. And with that, I will ask the city or Julian if they care to provide further details on the item that's before us today.
I don't have anything to add. I think the superintendent and business manager probably do.
Just, Julian, much like we said at the subcommittee meeting when we started talking about it, you know, we really felt, and we had been talking to, I think we mentioned it to Marb in previous budget years and our city council that, you know, our teachers had been frozen on steps and hadn't been getting raises, and we saw losing some teachers to other districts. We think now, especially with the COVID funds, there's going to be and new positions as a result, as Secretary McCaw said, you know, social work positions and, you know, other types of support. We're going to have to go out and compete with a lot of other districts who are also receiving COVID funds in order to put those supports in place. So we think it's a fair contract. We really believed that our teachers had, excuse me, had taken it on the chin the last couple of years, you know, due to the city's finances. And, you know, we feel like we can certainly support the contract over the next 2 or 3 years.
With that, why don't we open it up for any questions from the board?
This is Mark. Explain to me why this agreement was posted in basically August.
I'm going to have to, Mark, if I can ask you to pause for a moment. Anyone who's not speaking, would you mind muting your phone? And then Mark, I just need you to turn up your volume or speak a little louder, please.
Can you hear me now?
Better, thank you.
The question is, the settlement of the contract was in August. Actually, it was signed in July, and it wasn't filed until until about a month ago with the town, which is questionable relative to the guideline to the statute regarding teacher negotiations. Why are we not seeing? Why are we seeing it in March when the agreement was signed in July? Actually, it was
I can answer the question. Depending on who you ask, either Art, the board's attorney, and or the federations, we didn't get a final draft of the copy, so we couldn't file it until whenever it was in February. It was nobody's fault. It's just kind of like, you know, they were going back and forth. And again, depending on who you asked, it was, you know, somebody didn't get an email back to somebody didn't return an email. So we didn't get a final draft of the actual contract back until almost February.
Okay.
Does that satisfy your question, Mark?
Yeah, I mean, it's kind of
certainly is not the practice that we would expect.
Yeah.
Agreed.
You know, there's nothing I can say other than it's not good practice. You're exactly right.
Thank you, sir.
That said, I would move if there's no. I would move for acceptance. It's consistent. I would move to accept, and I would speak to it after the motion's been laid on the table.
All right. And any other questions before we put the motion on the table from the board? Great, seeing none.
Good morning.
Oh, yes, go right ahead.
Sorry to interrupt, Steve Felsigno. I let a few people know I was going to be late. I'm just coming on now. I do apologize.
Welcome, Steve. Steve, is there a question?
I think he was just letting us know he had
Oh,
No,
joined the meeting.
I'm just letting you know I'm on. Sorry.
okay, very good.
Oh, boy.
All right, any other questions? I think this is a modest contract from a wage perspective. It's consistent with the direction we've been going with respect to healthcare. And I think that the city did a good job other than the timing of execution and getting it before the board. if there are no further comments or questions, then I'd be happy to entertain a motion to approve the West Haven Federation of Teachers labor agreement.
So moved.
Is there a second?
David.
Great, it's been moved and seconded. Any discussion? Great, seeing none. Julian, over to you.
Mr. White,
Approve.
Mr. Waxenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Biller,
Yes.
Mr. Hamilton,
Yes.
Mr. Felsigno,
Yes. Yes.
Ms. Shaw,
Yes.
and Secretary McCaw.
Yes.
Are there any other members that have joined the meeting that I didn't mention? All right, that's everybody.
Excellent. Okay, so the agreement passes. With that, that concludes all of the agenda items we have for West Haven today. And therefore, we will move on to the City of Hartford. Mayor, great to see you today. All right, confirming great. I was saying Mayor Rossi, great to see you today, and Mayor Broden, great to hear you today, sir. How are you?
Good to hear you as well. Good morning, Secretary McCaw.
All right, so for Hartford, we did not have a subcommittee meeting in February. Our OPM team did meet with the superintendent to map out some next steps pertaining to data that the subcommittee is interested in regarding special education. We're hoping to have data to report out at the upcoming subcommittee meeting. Our first item for Hartford is review and discussion of the monthly financial report for January 2021. We have a report in our meeting materials, and the city is going to provide an update. So Mayor, over to you and your team.
Sure. Thank you again. There are not a lot of significant changes from the last report. We are currently, and we think conservatively, projecting a year-end surplus of $961,000. We've seen some, additional favorability, net favorability on the revenue side. Our tax collection continues to be strong, although there's been some timing. To some extent, that's a timing issue, and we're keeping close watch on that. Like West Haven, we saw a significant drop in revenue from money and property, i.e. interest. So that is an offsetting drop. But overall, we're seeing some favorability in the property tax collection, which is good. On the expenditure side, we have seen some additional favorability in benefits, and we are tracking some not recorded potential favorability in other areas, including healthcare, as we've talked about before. So we're going to continue to keep a close watch on that, but that's why I say we think our estimate may be conservative right now. Happy to go, over any other categories, but for the most part, that the favorability is made up of a bunch of small items. It's not one big thing.
Great, Mayor, can you or a member of your team talk a little bit about the projection for other financing sources as compared to fiscal year 20? It looks like you're projecting that revenues will come in around 7.7 million. Just curious on what's causing the change as compared to the prior year. Is that mostly parking revenues?
Sure. Jen or Leanne, you want to hit that?
Good morning, this is Jen. Yes, the other financing sources, Secretary McCaw, are you asking about the $7 million?
Yes,
is that one? Yes, yeah. So that is the library funding, I believe, that we get from the corporation donations, that we go directly to the library instead of coming to the city first and then going to the library. So you see an offsetting $6 million in the library line item if I'm looking at page 1. So those two offset.
Right. I was wanting to understand why the actuals came in at 9.7 million in fiscal 20 for other financing, and the projection is lower for fiscal 21.
Oh, I'm sorry. Let me look at that. I know we have an answer on that in here. It looks like part of it is due, yes, to the parking. Yes, that is accurate. Yeah, and I can dig into that further if you want more detailed information on that. But yes, you're correct. Parking is correct there.
Great, thank you. And with respect to health expenses, are you seeing some favorability? You know, a lot of municipalities, including the state, are seeing lower spend due to more telehealth, fewer elective procedures, et cetera. Is Hartford seeing the same in its trend thus far for the fiscal year?
We are thus far not as significant a favorability as in FY20, but we are seeing a favorable trend. We're waiting at least till P9 to record any of that, just because of the uncertain nature of those expenses and when and how they hit.
Great.
And, you know, we've also, I think, you know, as we talked about in prior meetings, conscious of the fact that at some point you may see, just as we've seen unusually low spending, you may see unusually high spending as things begin to open up and people begin to seek care and undergo procedures that they had delayed.
Very good. And Mayor, the last question I have would be just a quick update on how we're doing with our pay-as-you-go CapEx plan. I know that's baked into the debt line item, but if you could give an update, that'd be great.
Sure. So as we are going through our budget process right now, we're also doing our update the capital plan and capital reserve. We believe that we'll be able to fund the capital plan that we'll be budgeting for in the coming year. And that said, as you know, there are many capital expenditures that we wish we could fund that we likely will not.
Excellent. Thank you, Mayor. I stand as a partner with you to get through this. Any other questions on the financial report for Hartford?
This is Mark. Mr. Mayor, you budgeted for $1377 according to your sheet for full-time payroll projections. I assume there are some vacancies in there?
Yes.
And so those vacancies reflect some of the, I don't want to say surplus, but some of the savings, but those would be probably offset by overtime?
There is, depending on the department, some of it is offset by overtime. We have some attrition savings in police, but we've had significant overtime spending in our police department this year for reasons that we've talked about, including all the needs of all the public safety needs last summer, large events, protests, as well as a spike in violence in the fall. We've seen that run rate of overtime come down, but we've also seen, in the last week, a renewed spike in violence that I'm concerned about. So yes, in the police department where there is significant attrition, there's also significant offsetting OT. Elsewhere, for example, in ES&T, our 911 dispatchers, similar offsetting of attrition savings by overtime. But then for the rest of the city, for the most part, the attrition savings, are net favorable and a part of that, and result partly in that favorability that you see here.
Okay, and the other piece of it is, I'm assuming that you budget health care costs for those, well, there are vacancies, but there's health care costs associated with the vacancies should there be hires in for those vacant positions. So one could assume that there'd be a savings, quote unquote, surplus, depending upon the other areas within the healthcare for the fact that that those premiums are not being spent because there's vacant positions, correct?
That's correct.
Okay, thank you.
Other questions? Tom? Or Bob?
Yes. Mr. Mayor, what are some of the capital expenditures that you do not think you'll be able to make that you really wish you could?
It's a long list. it is unfortunately a very long list. We have been trying to dedicate resources to road work and both road reconstruction and paving on an ongoing basis. In the neighborhood of $2 to $3 million. We would like to be dedicating significantly more to that on an ongoing basis because the roads and the age of the roads demand it. We have a levee and a dike system and a flood control system that is in need of enormous expenditure. We're hopeful that some of that we might be able to secure through some federal infrastructure spending, but we don't know that yet, and we have been doing our best to stay up to speed with the plan we've put forward to the Army Corps of Engineers. But just to give you an example, the pump stations throughout the city, we have about a half a dozen pump stations throughout the city. They're all old. They need to be replaced. Replacing all of them would be a cost of about $40 million. We're trying to chip away at issues like that, but there are many, many significant infrastructure issues that need to be dealt with. We have also been, as a city, deliberately and strategically acquiring particularly blighted property through tax deed sales. And some of that property is located on main commercial corridors. We want to get that commercial property fixed up, no longer blighted, and then either sold or leased so that it generates revenue and can create retail space and jobs as well as more vibrant corridors. I could go on at much greater length than you probably want me to about the things we'd like to do.
Hopefully a chunk of that will be in the infrastructure bill, but the with respect to the repairing of roads, is some of that related to roads, major thoroughfares coming into Hartford? It's definitely. Is there any way to share, to try to get the suburbs to share in that expense? Because it's a lot of suburban people using those roads to come into work and giving you the bill.
If you're asking me, do I think there's logic to that? Yes. If you're asking me whether I think there's any likelihood of that, no. And the road reconstruction work that needs to be done is not all on main thoroughfares. We've done quite a bit of work on main thoroughfares, but it's the many hundreds of miles of roadways that we have throughout the city, throughout our neighborhoods as well.
Thank you.
I just had a quick question on the education side. Your projections are still showing at this point you're going to exactly spend the budget, and I don't know whether these numbers come from the Board of Education or from the city, but is there any update as to where we think the Board of Ed really is? And is there, my recollection is last year some or maybe all of whatever surplus was generated there was, I believe, rolled over into the non-recurring fund. So I'm just wondering what the current status or thinking is on the education side, and I'm assuming that there's no projected shortfall, or else I assume the number would, your projection would have that.
I think that's right. There is not a projected shortfall. We have not changed the projection from the budget until we have numbers from the Board of Education that reflect that. We are in active conversations with them, but there's also a great deal of, I think, still a great deal of uncertainty about various funding sources, revenue streams, to what extent they can be offsetting. So those are some things that need to be worked through over the next couple of months. To the extent there is any surplus at the end of this year in the Hartford Public Schools, it would roll back to the city as surplus because we have fully funded the 2% reserve fund that is authorized under state law for the Board of Education.
Okay, thank you. Yep.
Questions on Hartford's financial report?
Yeah, one thing on Secretary.
Yes, Kim, go ahead.
We do continue to ask for the Board of Ed to provide us with projections, and we do not have projections on their detailed report. So, and I know that they don't attend this meeting regularly. So it is important that they start to provide real projections on their financials so that we can have a better understanding of where they stand.
So we will reach out directly to the Board of Ed, but also Mayor, through you and through Jen, if that could be a part of the standard monthly reporting, that would be great. And then
Absolutely.
the only other thing that I would ask is that at a future subcommittee meeting, we just talk a little bit further about the capital plan for Hartford. We all recognize that when the recovery plan was put together, that one of the strategies was to use some of the year-end operating surpluses to provide resources to keep that capital plan surviving. So I would like to spend some time on that at a future meeting to make sure that it's solid.
And that is, Secretary, sorry, that is what we have been able to do over the past couple of years.
Right.
You know, as you know, in the last year's adopted budget, we adopted a lower level of capital reserve funding than we wanted. Right, our plan had built in 10.4 million. We budgeted, I believe, 6.8. That was one of the places where we found savings as necessary in the last year's budget. But from the surplus generated last year, we were able to shift north of 6 million in that surplus into our capital reserve, and we continue to try to look for every opportunity to use any favorability to fund that plan, as well as to continue steadily building up fund balance.
Agreed. That we should just spend a little time on that at a future meeting to see what the next 2 to 3 years looks like. But you've been doing a good job at making that work. And finally, just to Bob's question, with respect to surrounding suburbs that contribute to the deterioration of assets, I do think that's where the state comes in to provide support to some of our more distressed municipalities in those types of infrastructure investments. And we certainly look at our more distressed municipalities when we're looking at bonding and how we can support some of those needs. That is a way of doing redistribution, if you will. So with that, I have no further questions on the financial report. If anyone has any other questions, please feel free to ask them now. Otherwise, we don't have anything else for the city of Hartford for today.
Okay.
Okay, excellent. Thank you, Mayor, and great to meet you, Jen.
Thank you.
All right, next up we have the town of Sprague. And the first item on the agenda, just confirming we have the Sprague leadership team here today.
First Selectman here.
Good morning, First Selectman. All right, great. So with respect to the subcommittee update, we did not have a meeting in February. The town, however, has since completed and submitted its fiscal year 2020 financial statements. Those financial statements will be on the agenda of the March subcommittee meeting. And obviously will be reflected in the subcommittee update to the full board in April. First Selectman, you may want to provide a preview of the financial highlights, and if so, I'll turn the meeting over to you to address the board.
Oh, okay. As far as just the financial highlights, the revenues are currently at about 78%, so we're down a little bit lower from year over year, partially due to MARB funding, and then also the taxes are down a little bit from last year, and that's because of the deferment, but we anticipate that the full amount will come in. Expenditures are very close to the same from last year, so there's not much difference with that. Cash flow is moving along nicely, and at this point, with only a couple of exceptions, our invoices are 30 days or less. So that's a progress that we've made that we're pleased with.
That's great news.
So, and I'll be happy to take any questions that you might have.
Just for the board's just so the board knows, the first selectman shifted into our financial update. So we will address the audit
Oh, I'm
financial
sorry.
highlights at a later time. No problem at all. Any questions on Sprague's budget update as of January 31st? First selectman, is there anything that you care to report pertaining to the Board of Education and how they're doing with the cost for the current year?
The Board of Education is, their expenditures are at about 48%, which is just about in line with where they were last year. They are anticipating a surplus at this point. Of course, you know, that's pending with other students coming in, but those things are moving along nicely for them as well.
I can answer that. This is Bill Hull, the superintendent.
Oh,
How are you today?
Hi, Superintendent. Thank you for stepping in.
No problem. Cheryl, thanks for pitch hitting. Our surplus right now, again, it's still early and it can change, is a little bit greater than 140,000. For us, that's pretty good. We have been helped out by ESSER funds and now ESSER 2 funds. So we anticipate being able to give some money back to the town.
And Superintendent, can you give an update on the status of your schools with respect to reopening and the status on the use of your ESSER 1 funds? Will you exhaust the funds in the current year? Will you be tapping into ESSER 2, or will you be using those dollars towards the next 1 to 2 fiscal years?
Well, ESSER 2, we're planning now. Moving forward, we had to do a needs assessment. We uploaded that, and our budget for ESSER 2 will go forward. Our ESSER 1 are basically expended moving forward. We may have some money available towards the end of this year. And your first question was, our reopening. We are open 5 days a week. We began transitioning back. We were 4 days a week and began transitioning back to 5 days a week 3 weeks ago. And by the end of March, we will be back full time. Right now, Wednesdays are half days. We're doing that so we can plan for distance learners. But we have by the end of March, we will be back full time 5 days a week.
Thank you.
I can also give you a few highlights from the audit if you would like.
Sure. Any other questions on Sprague's financial report before we have some audit highlights?
This is Mark. On the board side, for the subcommittee, for the superintendent to prepare at least, and I think I mentioned this before, a summary. There's 3 areas that consistently are overspent, some which really drives the over expenditure of the budget in total. The transportation, again, it's projected to be about 23,000. Some rationale for that, if you don't mind, at the subcommittee. Special ed private school tuition, that's been a big problem for you over the years, which caused you to be here possibly at the beginning. But that said, that's another 25,000 overage. Can you identify without violating obviously any privacy rules? The rationale for that, obviously one student can choose that up, but that would be interesting to see what's causing that. And finally, the tuition to the magnet schools, listing the magnet schools, the population, and the cost for each school. That's almost 100,000. Well, it's 90,000. That's a lot for Sprague to handle. That would be interesting for us to look at the subcommittee level to try to get a handle on why there was such a boon, if you will, from 45,000 budgeted to over 135,000 expended this year. So, for the subcommittee, if those 3 areas could be somewhat highlighted for us at the subcommittee by the superintendent, I'd really appreciate it. Thank you.
Thanks, Mark.
That will be no problem whatsoever.
Thank you.
Okay. Very good. Other questions or discussions on the financial report? Okay, First Select Woman, please go ahead and give us an update on the financial highlights of the audit if you'd like to do so at this time.
Sure. One of the things that we did decrease our deficit in the general fund by $770,985. So that was a change. But there was also an increase in the deficit in the capital non-recurring of $183,666. And we had resolved most of the prior findings from the previous year.
Thank you. And by chance, do you have of note what your closing fund balance would be for the audit that's completed?
Yep. Let's grab that for you. It's negative $48,306.
Okay. Thank you. So we were aware that it was going to take us some time to address that matter when your financial plan was put before the board. I suspect your results show progress in that area.
Yes.
Excellent. Okay. Other questions for First Selectman on the highlights in the financial statements? We will have a chance to delve into details in the subcommittee. Okay. All right. Well, seeing none, that concludes everything we have on the agenda for the town of Sprague. Is there any other business today?
No.
Very good. Okay. With that, just a couple of comments with respect to municipal aid, just to make sure that the board and our member municipalities are all on the same page. Obviously, we have 3 or 4 major either items that are under consideration. First of all, we're aware that the governor's budget did propose funding for our distressed municipalities. All of our municipalities in MARB fall in that category and would be eligible for additional funding. If the budget as contemplated were to pass the legislature, for Hartford, that would be $11.1 million, for Sprague, $260,000, and for West Haven, that would be $4.9 million. And so the final decisions obviously will occur between now and early June. The second matter pertaining to municipal aid that you probably learned about would be the tiered pilot that is reflected in House Bill 6516. The tiered pilot bill creates a new funding formula for pilot payments. It recognizes municipalities that have a heavier tax exempt property burden. Tier 1 municipalities under this language would receive 50% of their full pilot entitlements. And so what's most important to note is that this bill comes into play if the level of funding, the appropriation increases, and that is all subject to final budget negotiation. All right, so that's kind of one, stay tuned on how that fares. The bill right now reimagines the formula, and then it's to be determined whether or not additional funding would actually be provided in the budget. And then finally, as we know, Congress did pass the American Rescue Plan Act that includes about $1.7 billion in local relief to our municipalities. The most of the details that we have right now are just the language that is in the bill, which does not contain a lot of specificity other than that the funding can be used for any impacts of the COVID pandemic. It cannot be used towards paying down of any pension debt or towards pension ADA costs. There is a component where it can support revenue replacement, but it is looking at revenues as compared to the prior fiscal year. And in some municipalities, they might show a decrease. In some municipalities, they may not. It does provide for COVID-related expenditures, as well as premium pay for impacted employees. I think what's most important to know is that the funding will be provided in 2 tranches but we will need Treasury guidance to clarify for municipalities how the funds can be used and the extent to which it should or should not be factored into the budgets that this board will take into consideration for our member municipalities. So there's no assumption that you can just take those dollars and, and utilize them in your general fund to balance the budget. We're going to need Treasury guidance to determine which components of the general fund budgets these dollars can support. So more to come on that. We'll be monitoring Treasury guidance, and I know that our mayors and their finance directors will be doing so as well. With that, I have nothing further in other business, but I just want to give you a quick update on Muni Aid. All right, so if that is, no one has any questions, then well, let's pause. Are there any questions on anything that I shared on Muni Aid? I think there are probably more questions than answers, but.
Secretary, do you have any idea when we might actually see some real definitive guidance on the American Rescue Act funding? Is that, weeks away, or do you think it's a few more months? Or
so we'll tell you, Tom, that the coronavirus relief funds, there were 3 to 4 rounds of guidance that flowed out anywhere from 30 days after passage to 5 to 6 months after passage, and it kept getting clearer and clearer. It gets clearer as the states ask questions, and then sometimes they realize that maybe the language isn't written clear enough to address the intent. So I would think within 30 days we'll probably have our initial round, but there'll probably be multiple rounds of guidance coming out of Treasury. The only positive is that they have a lot of guidance that was used for CRF that could also be used based on this bill. It seems like some of the bill language has some similarities. I don't know if Treasury will choose to do so, but the most flexible component of CRF guidance that came out of Treasury was that language around the use of the funds towards public safety and public health costs that Treasury deemed automatically substantially dedicated to the COVID pandemic. So the revenue replacement piece needs clarification, and the extent to which they include that kind of language that allows you to cover it for your police departments, for example. But I think we're at least a month out before we have our first run of guidance from the department. And we'll share that with the board as soon as we see anything come through. Okay. All right, any other questions before there's a motion to adjourn? Because we're actually concluding early, and it's remarkable. It's because I can see all of your faces, so. All right, is there a motion to adjourn?
So moved.
Seconded.
David Billy.
Great, David is seconded, and I think we have to actually do the roll call, so I'll give it to Julia to handle that for us.
Mr. White,
Yes.
Mr. Waxenberg,
Yes.
Mr. Biller,
Yes.
Mr. Hamilton,
Yes.
Mr. Falsigno,
Yes.
Ms. Shaw,
Yes.
and Secretary McCaw.
Yes, indeed. Great to see all of you. Meeting's adjourned. Take care.
Bye, everybody.
Bye.
Bye-bye.
Bye.